Isaac's flashlight cut through the blizzard, but it wasn't the snow that froze him. Rook, his loyal German shepherd, was barking wildly, dragging him toward the fence. Then Isaac saw her, a young woman, blood staining the snow beneath her, barely breathing. But it wasn't just the blood that sent a chill down his spine. Something about her didn't add up. Why was she out here? And why did Rook react like this? As Isaac reached down to help her, a tiny green light flickered on her jacket, hidden from view, a tracker, and it was still active. But who was hunting her? The storm outside battered Isaac's cabin, a relentless whiteout that swallowed everything in its path. Inside, the only sounds were the crackling fire and Rook's soft breathing. Isaac stood by the window watching the swirling snow. The ranch was his retreat, a place far removed from the chaos of the world. It had been his grandfather's land, built with hard hands and an old spirit, but for Isaac it was just silence now, a fragile peace. He hadn't always been this way. Before the war, before the weight of memories took root in his mind, he had been a different man, a soldier with a purpose. But that was before Ramadi, before Fallujah, before the things he couldn't unsee. Now he hoped the isolation would keep him safe, keep the ghosts at bay. But the wind outside, howling like an angry beast, reminded him that peace was an illusion. Isaac glanced down at Rook, his service dog, whose calm presence was the only thing that kept him tethered. Rook wasn't just a dog, he was Isaac's lifeline. When the ringing in his ears started, when panic tightened in his chest, Rook was there grounding him, keeping him connected to the present. Without the dog, Isaac feared he might lose himself to the darkness. Rook's head lifted, his ears pricked. Isaac froze, a flicker of unease crawling down his spine. The dog was rarely so alert. Rook nudged Isaac's leg, a silent signal that something wasn't right. Isaac knew better than to ignore it. He turned from the window, glancing toward the door. The woman was still in the other room. Her blood had stained the snow when Rook found her. Her clothes were thin for the cold, her skin waxy and pale. The first thing Isaac had noticed was the tracker sewn into the lining of her jacket. It was small, hidden, but it didn't belong. Isaac's heart tightened as he thought about it. He didn't know who she was or why she had been out there, but he knew she wasn't just a lost traveler. Something about her situation didn't add up. She wasn't the first stranger to cross his path, but she was different. Rook stood beside him, now his warm body pressing against Isaac's leg. Isaac reached down, running his fingers through the dog's fur. Rook's presence was a quiet comfort, but even the dog seemed uneasy. Isaac's thoughts raced. The storm outside was bad, but it wasn't the only danger. He turned back to the woman. She wasn't just a victim of the storm. She was part of something bigger, something dangerous. Isaac had been a soldier once trained to recognize threats. This woman, this stranger in his cabin, was a threat. He could feel it in his bones. But there was more. Rook had never acted like this with anyone else. The dog had been his constant companion, but now the way Rook had reacted to the woman, the way he had been so insistent in finding her. It was like the dog knew something Isaac didn't. Isaac took a slow breath. His instincts were kicking in, but so was his hesitation. He had spent years running from his past, from the things that haunted him. He had come to this place for peace, for isolation. But now, with this woman in his cabin, and the tracker ticking away somewhere on her peace, seemed like a distant memory. He didn't want to get involved. He didn't want to deal with whatever this was. But as he stared at the woman by the fire, her shallow breathing the only sign of life Isaac knew, he didn't have a choice. She wasn't just a random stranger. She was someone who had crossed his path for a reason. Isaac looked down at Rook. The dog's eyes were fixed on him, unwavering, waiting for a command. Isaac had always trusted the dog relied on him in ways he couldn't explain. Now, as he looked at Rook, he realized the dog wasn't just offering comfort. He was telling Isaac what to do. Isaac took a step toward the woman. The fire crackled in the background, casting shadows on the walls, but his mind was focused on one thing. This woman was in danger, and for some reason she had brought that danger to his doorstep. And as much as he wanted to turn away, as much as he wanted to retreat into the quiet, Isaac knew it was too late. There was no going back now. The storm outside howled louder, but inside the cabin, everything was still. Isaac knelt beside the woman, his fingers brushing her cold skin. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain: his life was about to change. The quiet, the isolation, the peace he had hoped for, it was all slipping away. And for the first time in years, Isaac wasn't sure he cared. Isaac knelt beside the woman, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Her skin was unnaturally cold, and her shallow breathing sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He could feel the weight of her blood on the snow even now, as if it was a trail that led back to something dark, something dangerous. Rook stood nearby, watching Isaac closely, his ears flicking with every noise. The dog was always alert, but this was different. There was no growling now, no warning barks. Rook was quiet, waiting. He sensed something Isaac couldn't fully grasp yet. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have, filled with unspoken questions. Isaac had lived this way for years now, silent, disconnected, a man alone with his thoughts and his memories. But even in the quiet of his cabin, even in the fierce storm outside, something about the woman made him feel exposed, vulnerable. Rook, Isaac whispered, his voice tight. The dog shifted closer, nudging him lightly with his head. Isaac turned to look at the dog. "What's going on, boy?" Rook's gaze didn't waver. Isaac knew the dog's expressions as well as he knew his own. This wasn't just a reaction to a strange woman. Rook was sensing something more, something Isaac wasn't ready to face. His fingers brushed the woman's jacket, searching for any sign of identification. There was nothing. No wallet, no phone. Just the hard, cold edge of the tracker sewn into her clothing. The tiny green light that had caught his attention earlier still blinked faintly. A signal. She was being tracked and someone was looking for her. Isaac pulled his hand back, running it through his hair. The weight of the situation was settling over him like a thick fog. He had no answers, only questions, and each one seemed to pull him deeper into a web he hadn't asked to be part of. He glanced out the window, but the storm outside offered no answers. The blizzard had swallowed up the world, leaving him isolated, cut off from everything. He couldn't make a phone call. He couldn't reach anyone for help. He couldn't even leave the cabin without battling the fury of nature itself. This was his world now, this cabin, this isolation. It was supposed to be a refuge, a place where he could finally breathe again. But now it felt like a cage, and the walls of the cage were closing in around him. Isaac looked back at the woman. She was still unconscious, her face pale and drawn. There was a faint trace of fear in her features, even in sleep, like she was running from something that hadn't yet caught up with her. Her breath was shallow but steady, and Isaac noticed the blood on the front of her jacket, a thick, dark stain that had soaked into the fabric, freezing against the cold. He had seen that blood before. Not in this form, but in the way it stained the earth, the way it clung to memories. Isaac shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. This was different. She was different. "What happened to you?" Isaac muttered, mostly to himself. But the woman didn't answer, of course. She couldn't. She was lost in whatever nightmare had brought her to his doorstep. Rook took a slow step forward, his eyes locked on the woman. The dog's posture was rigid, the fur along his back standing on end. Isaac felt the shift in the air, the change in the room. Rook wasn't just protecting Isaac now. He was watching over the woman as if she were one of his own. Isaac didn't know what to make of it. But he did know this. Rook had never acted like this with anyone else. The dog had always been his companion, his anchor in a world that had too many sharp edges. But now Rook's instinct was pulling him toward the woman, the stranger who had crashed into their quiet life like a storm. Isaac stood pacing the small cabin, trying to keep his mind focused on anything other than the weight of the situation. He moved to the kitchen and started boiling water, the familiar rhythm of the task helping to center him. The calm of his routine, something he had relied on for years, was the only thing that kept him tethered. He needed to do something. He needed to act. The soft click of Rook's paws on the floor broke his concentration. The dog had moved to the door, his body stiff with tension. Isaac stopped, his hand resting on the kettle. He knew that look. "Stay," Isaac said softly. Rook's tail twitched, but he didn't move. Isaac reached for his coat, pulling it on quickly. The dog had sensed something else, something outside. He opened the door, the wind rushing in like a living thing biting at his skin. The world outside had disappeared into a swirling mass of snow. Visibility was almost zero, but Isaac didn't need to see to know something was wrong. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and the instinct he'd buried for so long flared to life. Rook bounded into the snow without hesitation, and Isaac followed the cold, hitting him like a slap. The wind howled, pushing against him, trying to turn him around, but Isaac pushed forward, his boots crunching in the thick drifts. Rook was already ahead of him, moving fast, his shape a dark blur in the whiteout. Isaac struggled to catch up, but the snow was deep and the wind was relentless. He couldn't see Rook anymore, couldn't see anything but the storm. But then he heard it, a bark sharp and insistent. Not a warning this time, but something else. Something urgent. Isaac pushed forward, his lungs burning with the effort. He finally reached the fence line, his flashlight beam cutting through the snow. And there, standing over the woman, was Rook, his body tense, eyes fixed on something beyond Isaac's reach. Isaac's heart stopped. The woman's blood was still fresh on the snow, but now there was something else, a second darker shape in the distance. A figure moving slowly through the storm like a shadow that didn't belong. Isaac's stomach dropped. Someone else was out here. Someone who wasn't lost in the storm. Someone who had been hunting her. And now they were hunting him. Isaac's breath came in ragged gasps as he staggered back toward the cabin, the wind hammering against him. Rook was still at the fence, his body, a statue of tension, eyes locked on the shadowy figure in the distance. Isaac's instincts screamed that they were being watched, that they had been found. His boots sunk into the snow as he moved the flashlight beam, barely cutting through the heavy storm. The woman Leah lay unconscious on the floor inside. Isaac's mind raced, but there was no time to think. The presence outside the figure in the storm was closing in. He could feel it. The walls of his cabin, once a sanctuary, suddenly felt too thin, too fragile against the weight of the situation. The cabin was supposed to be his escape. The land had been his grandfather's, a place of solace and quiet. Isaac had come here to bury his past, to outrun the memories that clung to him like shadows. But that past was clawing its way back. And it wasn't just his ghost that had followed him, it was something far worse. He knew the figure outside wasn't just a stranger caught in the storm. It was someone who knew exactly where he was. Isaac's hand hovered near the door, his mind scrambling for a plan. Rook's growl reached him before he saw the man. The dog's low, threatening rumble cut through the wind like a knife. Isaac's heart raced as he crouched behind the door, steadying his breath. He grabbed the shotgun off the wall, his fingers trembling. He couldn't afford to hesitate. This wasn't just an intruder, it was a predator, and Isaac's life and Leah's depended on how he responded. The door creaked open just enough to let Isaac peer through. The storm outside had swallowed the world, leaving him with nothing but the sound of the wind and the soft rattle of the cabin's walls. But the figure was moving closer, steady, methodical. The footsteps crunched in the snow, each one echoing in the silence like a drumbeat. Isaac's eyes darted to the dog. Rook stood still, his fur bristling, his gaze locked on the stranger. Isaac's chest tightened. The dog wasn't reacting out of aggression, but out of instinct. The same instinct that Isaac had trusted in the field. This wasn't a simple trespasser. This was someone who had come with purpose. Isaac's finger tightened on the shotgun's grip, his muscles coiled in preparation. The man outside wasn't alone. Isaac could feel it in his bones. There were more of them watching, waiting, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they came for. The man stopped a few yards away from the porch. The snow continued to fall in sheets, but through the flurry, Isaac could make out the outline of the figure. The man was dressed in dark, tactical gear, his face hidden by a mask. The posture was too professional, too deliberate to be a random wanderer. And the way he moved. Isaac knew this wasn't someone who had stumbled upon the ranch by accident. A harsh knock came at the door, polite but firm. The kind of knock that didn't belong in the middle of a storm. Isaac's mind spun. Every instinct he had honed during years of military service screamed at him to act, to prepare. But the part of him that had spent so many years avoiding conflict, the part that had grown used to being alone, wanted to wait, to hide, to let it pass. But it wouldn't pass. Not this time. Isaac stood still, listening to the wind howl outside. He had no choice but to face whatever was waiting on the other side. Whatever danger had found him here. Rook's growl deepened a warning that echoed through the cabin. Isaac didn't flinch. He knew exactly what to do. Isaac closed the door slowly, making sure it was securely locked behind him. The man outside, Harris, he'd called himself, was gone, but the threat still hung in the air like a storm cloud. The howling wind outside seemed quieter now, but the silence inside the cabin was suffocating. Rook stood near the door, still on high alert, his eyes flicking between Isaac and the dark corners of the cabin. Isaac could feel the tension radiating from the dog. This wasn't just about keeping watch anymore. Rook knew they were in danger. Isaac's hand hovered near the shotgun by the door, but he didn't need to grab it yet. Not yet. His mind raced, replaying the conversation outside. Harris and his team weren't here for a friendly visit, they were hunting Leah. The realization hit Isaac like a punch to the gut. Leah wasn't just a random stranger who had stumbled onto his land. She was someone with information, someone dangerous enough to send a team like Harris's after her. Isaac's gaze flicked to the small medical kit on the table where he'd treated her earlier. She'd been unconscious when he found her, but now she was awake. Leah. Isaac hadn't seen her move since he'd brought her inside, but he could feel her presence in the room like a whisper. The storm was still raging outside, but there was another kind of storm inside him. The instinct to protect, to keep her safe, was strong. But another part of him, something dark, something trained, was whispering that maybe this wasn't his fight. She wasn't his responsibility. But as he turned, his eyes locked on Rook. The dog had been Isaac's anchor for years, the one thing that kept him grounded. But it was more than that. Rook had a way of knowing when things weren't right. Isaac looked at Rook, and in that moment he knew what he had to do. He walked to the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. It was easy to get lost in the warmth of the fire, to pretend everything was fine, but Isaac knew better than that. He knew the danger was already here. Rook, Isaac muttered softly. The dog's ears perked up, his eyes never leaving Isaac. Stay on guard. I'm not sure how much time we've got." The dog gave a low whine, but Isaac didn't need to repeat himself. Rook understood. Isaac wasn't sure he did, but there was no choice now. The storm outside had already made him feel trapped. Now the threats were closing in on all sides. Isaac turned toward the hallway. The door to the guest room was slightly ajar, and beyond it he could hear the faint rustle of Leah's movement. Her soft breath, shallow and labored, filled the space. Isaac paused before pushing the door open. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. Leah was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale, eyes wide with exhaustion. Her gaze snapped up when Isaac entered, but there was something else in her eyes, now a flicker of fear, but something more, something like resolve. She didn't speak at first, but her eyes asked the question he was dreading to hear. "What now?" Isaac hesitated, then crossed the room and sat down across from her, careful to keep his distance. He didn't want to seem too close, too comforting. Not yet. He had to remain distant to keep control of the situation. If he let his guard down, he might lose himself again. "You're awake?" Isaac said, his voice flat. He wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. Leah didn't respond immediately. She just stared at him, her breath shallow. Isaac noticed the way her fingers fidgeted with the edges of the blanket. She wasn't just tired, she was scared too. And for good reason. Whatever she was running from, whatever she had been through, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "How bad is it?" Isaac finally asked. Leah glanced down at the makeshift bandage on her side. "I'll survive," she said quietly. But Isaac could hear the tremble in her voice. She wasn't fooling anyone. Isaac nodded. "Good. Because we're not out of the woods yet." Leah didn't look up, but Isaac could feel her eyes on him. She was waiting for him to explain, to tell her what the next step was. But Isaac didn't have the answers. He wasn't the one with the plan. The only thing he knew was that he couldn't let her go. Not now. Not after everything. "What happened to you?" Isaac asked, his voice tight. "Why were they after you?" Leah swallowed hard, her gaze darting toward the door. I was meeting someone," she said, her voice wavering. "Someone who had information. They had proof of something big, something corporate. And they wanted to silence him. I was supposed to meet him, but..." Her voice trailed off, a look of deep sorrow in her eyes. Isaac watched her closely. He knew what she was about to say. She had been too late. Or maybe she had seen something she shouldn't have. Either way, she wasn't just a victim in this story. She was a player. She looked up at him, her eyes now filled with an urgency he couldn't ignore. "They killed him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They murdered him. Right in front of me." Isaac clenched his jaw, his mind racing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was bigger than that. Much bigger. Rook let out a low growl from the corner of the room, his body rigid. Isaac's heart skipped a beat. The dog had sensed something again, something approaching. A flash of movement outside the window caught Isaac's eye. The storm still raged, but now in the flickering light, Isaac could see figures moving in the distance. He stood up quickly, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It wasn't just about keeping Leah safe. It was about fighting back. Isaac's heart pounded as he moved toward the window, his eyes scanning the whiteout. He could barely make out figures in the distance, moving slowly but deliberately. They were coming closer, and there was no time to waste. The storm outside might be fierce, but it wasn't enough to stop them. Rook's low growl reminded Isaac that the dog was on edge, alert to every shift in the air. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with the understanding that something dangerous was approaching. Isaac turned toward Leah, who had silently watched him move. Her wide eyes were filled with fear, but there was something else, something defiant. She wasn't just a victim in this. Whatever she had witnessed, whatever she had been through, she wasn't going to sit idly by. Isaac could see it in the way she held herself, even with her wounds. "We have to move," Isaac said, his voice sharp with urgency. He walked over to the table, grabbing his gear, his rifle, the heavy-duty jacket. His movements were fast and precise, instinct taking over. His time in the military, his training had never really left him. The world outside may have changed, but he was still the same man when it came to survival. And survival meant doing whatever it took. Leah looked at him, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Isaac paused, glancing at her. There was no time to explain everything, no time for long speeches. There was only the moment. The moment when every decision could mean life or death. "I'm going to take care of it," Isaac said quietly. His gaze shifted to the window again, the figures still moving closer. The storm outside wasn't enough to cover their tracks. They were coming and they wouldn't stop. He didn't need to know who they were. He just needed to know how to stop them. Leah's breath hitched as she stood up, trying to steady herself on wobbly legs. "You can't do this alone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Isaac turned to face her fully now. There was no question in his eyes. "I'm not alone," he said simply. Rook moved beside him, his body a steady presence at Isaac's side. The dog knew what was coming and he was ready. Isaac didn't need anyone else. He had Rook. And that was enough. The figures outside were almost at the cabin now, their shapes more distinct against the swirling snow. Isaac grabbed his rifle and slung it over his shoulder, moving toward the back door. "I'll keep them distracted," Isaac said, his voice low and firm. "You stay here. Don't make a sound. If they find you, I know," Leah interrupted, her eyes wide but filled with resolve. "I won't make a sound. I won't do anything that'll put you in danger." Isaac nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. He didn't want Leah to be involved. He didn't want to drag her into this. But she had already been caught up in it, and now there was no way out. There was only survival. He stepped out into the blizzard, the door slamming shut behind him. The cold immediately hit him like a punch, the wind biting into his exposed skin. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not when the enemy was so close. Not when his only chance to protect Leah and himself was slipping away. Rook was already by his side, his tail straight and his eyes scanning the storm. They moved silently through the deep snow Isaac's boots, leaving only faint traces behind them. They had no choice but to keep moving to stay one step ahead. Every second counted. Isaac's pulse raced, but his mind was clear. He had done this before too many times. The difference now was that he wasn't alone. He had Rook, and together they were going to fight back. The figures were closer now, just yards away from the cabin. Isaac could make out their shapes more clearly, their dark forms stark against the white landscape. They were wearing tactical gear, their movements too coordinated to be just random searchers. This was a team that wasn't looking for just a lost woman. They were looking for something far more dangerous, something that had already cost one life, and would no doubt cost more if Isaac didn't act quickly. "Get ready," Isaac muttered to Rook, and the dog's ears perked, his body coiled and ready. Isaac crouched behind a snowdrift, his rifle aimed at the figures ahead. His breath came in shallow, controlled gasps. This wasn't about bravery. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about survival. And Isaac knew exactly how to do that. He held his position, watching as the figures neared the cabin. The wind shifted slightly and Isaac's heart skipped a beat. This was it. They were close enough now to be in range. The first move had to be his. "On my mark, Rook," Isaac whispered. The dog's head turned toward him, waiting. Isaac's hand tightened on his rifle. 3, 2. Isaac's heart pounded in his chest as the figures drew closer. The sound of his breath was drowned out by the wind, but it still felt like everything was moving in slow motion. His eyes locked onto the figures ahead. They were just a few yards from the cabin now, their footsteps muffled by the thick snow, but Isaac could feel the weight of their presence like a heavy weight pressing down on him. He knew the time for hesitation was over. The first figure, a tall man in black tactical gear, was leading the group. Isaac's eyes narrowed. There was something in the way the man moved that told Isaac this wasn't his first operation. He was a professional. He didn't need to be a tracker or a soldier to know that much. Isaac adjusted his position, making sure Rook was a step behind him. The dog was completely still, his body tense, waiting for the signal. They had done this before, moving together like a well-practiced team. The dog's sharp instincts and Isaac's years of training had made them a force to be reckoned with, but this was different. The first man stopped, his posture changing as he seemed to take notice of the faint prints in the snow, the faintest signs of movement, just enough to tell him something wasn't right. The man raised his head slightly, scanning the area with a practiced eye. Isaac held his breath, his finger tightening around the trigger. The moment was approaching. Don't let them find her, Isaac thought, his mind clear despite the chaos in the storm. He had to move quickly. There was no time to waste. If they found her, if they figured out where she was hiding, Isaac would lose everything. "Rook," he whispered, and the dog shifted into position, still low to the ground, waiting for the order. Isaac adjusted his grip on the rifle, his pulse steady despite the rising tension. The man ahead of him moved again, taking a few more steps forward, his gaze sharp, his movements deliberate. Isaac's breath caught in his throat as the figure stopped just outside the cabin. He could hear the man muttering something to the others, his voice low but sharp in the harsh winds. Isaac couldn't make out the words, but he could tell they were getting close. They were searching for a way in. Isaac's heart was in his throat now. He couldn't wait any longer. He rose from his crouch and with one swift motion aimed the rifle. He squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot was deafening, even in the swirling storm. The first man dropped instantly, a perfect shot to the chest. The others reacted immediately, their heads snapping toward Isaac's position. Chaos erupted as they scrambled for cover, drawing their weapons and moving into position. Rook was already moving, leaping through the snow with astonishing speed. The dog's growls were low, guttural, protective, not aggressive, as he raced forward, cutting through the whiteout like a blur. Isaac quickly followed, firing off another shot that knocked the second figure off his feet. The remaining men were faster now, moving like a well-oiled machine. They split up trying to flank Isaac, but he had already anticipated their moves. He knew this territory better than they did, and that gave him an advantage. Rook circled to the left, forcing one of the figures to duck down and take cover behind a snowbank. Isaac moved to the right, staying low, using the storm as his cover. He didn't hesitate. His training kicked in as his eyes darted from figure to figure. The man behind the snowbank was trying to get a clean shot, but Isaac was faster. He fired again, the shot ringing out as the man collapsed in the snow, his weapon slipping from his grasp. The remaining two were on the move, but Isaac had them pinned. Rook was already at one of their heels, forcing him to retreat. The other man tried to circle behind Isaac, but it was too late. Isaac caught a glimpse of his movement through the snowstorm, adjusted his aim, and fired again. The man stumbled back, his hand clutching his side. Isaac moved quickly, his boots crunching through the snow as he closed the distance. The man, now weakened, dropped to his knees, his face a mask of disbelief. Isaac stood over him, rifle aimed at the man's head. His eyes were cold-focused. He didn't care who they were. He didn't care what they were after. All that mattered was that they were a threat, and that threat had to be eliminated. "You should have stayed out of my way," Isaac said flatly, his voice low but filled with quiet menace. Before the man could respond, Isaac pulled the trigger, ending the fight. The remaining silence was deafening. Isaac stood in the snow, breathing heavily, his body tense. He had survived this encounter, but the weight of it hung heavy in the air. There were no more sounds, no more gunshots. Just the howling wind and the heavy beating of his heart. Rook stood beside him, his body, rigid eyes scanning the area for any further movement. Isaac exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. They had won this round, but the battle wasn't over. The storm outside may have given him cover, but it wasn't enough to hide the growing danger. There were more of them out there, more waiting to come for Leah. Isaac's mind raced. He could feel the clock ticking. He had to act. There was no time left to waste. He had to protect Leah, had to get them both out of this. But where could they go? How long could they hide? Isaac turned toward the cabin, his pulse still racing, but his mind clear now. They weren't safe here anymore. The war had come to him, and it wasn't going away. He started walking toward the cabin, Rook by his side, his thoughts set on the next move. He had one shot at this. Isaac's footsteps were heavy in the snow, his mind focused entirely on the cabin ahead. The storm howled around him, but his thoughts were clear. The fight had ended, but the danger wasn't over. Harris and his team weren't the only ones after Leah and Isaac knew there was still more to come. Rook walked beside him, his steps almost silent, ears alert. The dog's presence was reassuring, a constant reminder that Isaac wasn't truly alone. But that didn't mean he was safe. Isaac pushed open the cabin door with a creak, the quiet warmth inside in sharp contrast to the harsh cold outside. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of the storm wash away. His chest still felt tight from the fight. His body ached with the adrenaline that had been coursing through him, but there was no time to rest. No time to let his guard down. Leah was in the same spot he'd left her, sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes wide and haunted. She hadn't moved much, but Isaac could tell she was processing everything that had happened. She was scared, but she wasn't broken. He saw the resolve in her eyes. She wasn't going to be a victim. Not again. "You okay?" Isaac asked, his voice quieter now. The storm outside seemed to have swallowed the world whole, leaving only the faint crackling of the fire and the wind's distant roar. Leah nodded, but there was a tension in her that hadn't been there before. "I'm alive," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "But I'm not sure for how long." Isaac didn't have a comforting answer. The danger was still out there. He could feel it pressing in on him like a storm waiting to break through. The tracker in Leah's jacket. The men outside. They would be back. And next time it wouldn't just be one or two. There would be more. And they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Isaac moved to the table, grabbing the small satellite phone. The last time he'd checked, the signal had been blocked. But he needed to try again. If he could get in touch with Mark, someone who could help, they might stand a chance. As he powered on the phone, Leah's voice broke through the silence again. "Isaac, what now? We can't stay here. They know we're here." Isaac didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. She was right. The time for hiding was over. They couldn't stay put and hope for the best. Isaac needed to make a move, their move. He glanced at Rook, who was sitting quietly beside him, eyes fixed on the door, alert to any sound. The dog hadn't relaxed since the first shot fired. Isaac's finger hovered over the phone's screen, his mind turning over options, weighing risks. There was no simple way out. The storm wasn't helping. The land around the cabin was treacherous, difficult to navigate even for someone who knew it as well as Isaac did. But they couldn't stay here. He couldn't keep Leah locked away. They were already being hunted. "I'm calling Mark," Isaac said finally, his voice tight. "We need an extraction, now." Leah didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Isaac could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty, but there was something else there now too. Something hard, something that said she was ready to fight. The phone screen flickered and buzzed as the call connected. The faint, static-filled voice on the other end was a small comfort. Mark had always been the calm to Isaac's storm. He could be trusted, but Isaac knew even Mark wouldn't have an easy time getting them out of this. "Isaac, Mark," the voice crackled. "You still there? Where are you?" Isaac's grip on the phone tightened. He couldn't afford to be vague anymore. He had to make sure Mark understood how serious this was. "We're still at the cabin. The storm's making it hard to get a signal, but we're being hunted. I need your help. Now." There was a long pause before Mark responded. "I'm on it," he said, the tension clear even through the static. "Hold tight. I'll get a secure pickup lined up." "Where are you exactly?" Isaac took a deep breath, running through the coordinates in his head. He could feel Leah's gaze on him as he spoke. "You'll have to make it quick. They're already on their way back. Stay low. Stay quiet. I'll keep you updated," Mark replied. Isaac ended the call, his thoughts racing. He didn't know how much time they had, but every second counted. Every decision, every move had to be calculated. He turned to Leah. "Mark's getting us out. We have to move when the time comes." She didn't argue. Instead, she nodded. The weight of the situation had settled between them, but there was something else there too, an understanding that neither of them could afford to break. They had to hold it together for themselves and for each other. Rook's ears flicked. Isaac could feel the tension in the air again. The dog was on edge. Isaac glanced toward the window. The storm outside was no longer just a barrier. It was a mask. It was keeping them hidden for now, but soon it would be over. And when that happened, there would be no more running. The storm outside raged as though it had a life of its own. The wind howled through the trees, sending sharp gusts of snow crashing against the windows of the cabin. Isaac sat near the fire, his rifle across his lap, his mind not on the warmth but on the growing sense of urgency. Every minute that passed, the danger outside crept closer. The figures from earlier, they were coming. And Isaac couldn't afford to wait any longer. Rook lay near the hearth, eyes fixed on the door, his body a rigid statue of anticipation. The dog knew something was coming. Isaac could see it in the way the dog's muscles were coiled, every part of him on high alert. There was no comfort left in the cabin. The world outside had closed in, and Isaac could feel the weight of it pressing against him. Leah, still sitting on the bed, was quieter now. The initial fear in her eyes had been replaced with something else, something that mirrored Isaac's own resolve. She had said little since the call to Mark, but Isaac could tell she understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't a chance for escape. This was a fight, and they had no choice but to face it. Isaac stood and moved toward the window. The storm had not let up, but that was no longer an advantage. If anything, it made it harder to see, to hear. He could feel the pressure building in his chest, the heavy awareness of the trap they were in. No matter how hard he tried to focus on the mission, his mind kept circling back to one simple truth. They were coming for Leah, and they wouldn't stop until they had her. Isaac's thoughts shifted, his eyes, scanning the blizzard outside, but his mind was pulled back to darker memories, the ones he couldn't outrun, the ones that always resurfaced when he needed clarity the most. The fire, the screams, the chaos of war. In the past, he'd dealt with threats he could understand. But this wasn't just survival. This was something else entirely. And for the first time in years, Isaac felt the old instincts stir within him. He knew what he had to do. He turned back to Leah, who was watching him with those same quiet, determined eyes. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice steady. "When Mark gets, here we go. But I'm not waiting around for them to show up on their terms. We move first." Leah nodded, swallowing hard but not breaking his gaze. "I'm with you." "What do we do?" Isaac moved to the door and opened it a crack just enough to peek outside. The wind was biting, tearing at the cabin, but it was still quiet enough for him to hear something else. The faintest sound of boots crunching through the snow. They were getting closer. Isaac shut the door with a soft thud and turned back to Leah. "We need to leave now. There's a back way out through the woodshed. We can make it to the ridge. From there, we'll have a better chance of being spotted by Mark." He grabbed his jacket and started pulling it on. "I'll go first. Stay close." Leah hesitated, her gaze flicking to Rook, who was now standing at the door, his ears perked. It was as if the dog knew what was about to happen. He moved to Isaac's side close enough to feel his heartbeat. Rook let out a low, almost imperceptible growl, a sound that sent a shiver down Isaac's spine. "Stay alert," Isaac murmured. He looked at Leah. "When we go, don't stop. Don't look back." Leah's mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. She grabbed the rifle and slung it over her shoulder, her fingers gripping the strap. She was ready. The fight wasn't just Isaac's anymore, it was theirs. They moved through the cabin in silence, every step measured and deliberate. Isaac opened the back door slowly, the wind slamming into him the second he stepped outside. The storm was more than just an inconvenience now. It was a barrier, a shield. Isaac took a breath and looked back at Leah. She was right behind him, staying close, every movement purposeful. Rook, too, was close at Isaac's side, his body low to the ground, his eyes scanning every shadow in the snow. Isaac could feel the dog's tension, could sense the protective energy radiating off him. Rook had always been Isaac's anchor, but now more than ever, Isaac realized that the dog was more than that. Rook was the key to keeping them alive. The three of them moved swiftly, making their way to the woodshed, which was barely visible through the thick veil of snow. Isaac knew the land around the cabin better than anyone. He knew where to hide, where to run, and where the safest routes were. The ridge was only a mile away, but in this storm it felt like an eternity. Isaac paused for a moment, listening. The wind had died down slightly, but it wasn't enough to block out the sound of distant voices. They were coming. They were getting closer. "Stay low," Isaac whispered to Leah. He reached for his rifle, the weight of it comforting, but he knew that his weapon wasn't his greatest asset. It was the training he had, the instincts, the years of survival in the hardest conditions. He didn't wait for Leah to respond. Instead, he pushed forward, the snow deepening with each step. Rook moved ahead, navigating the snow with ease. Isaac kept his eyes on the path ahead, his senses heightened. The ridge was the only chance they had of getting picked up by Mark. But every second they spent out here in the open increased their chances of being caught. Isaac heard a faint crack, a footstep in the snow behind them. He didn't need to turn to know what it was. His body reacted before his mind could process the danger. He dropped to the ground, pulling Leah down beside him, his heart racing. Rook's low growl was the only sound that cut through the wind. Isaac's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted across the ridge. Every step felt heavier, the snow and wind pushing against him, but his mind was laser-focused. The storm outside wasn't their only threat now. The enemy was closing in, and he had no choice but to fight. Rook was already ahead, his body low to the ground, eyes sharp. Isaac trusted the dog more than anything, and right now Rook was their best chance. The helicopter's hum grew louder above them, its searchlight cutting through the thick snow. Isaac's thoughts were clear, but the urgency in his gut didn't let up. They needed to reach the extraction point. Fast. Leah followed close behind her, breaths heavy but steady. Isaac could feel her determination, the way she refused to be the victim anymore. They were in this together now. He glanced over his shoulder. The figures on the ridge were moving too quickly, closing the gap. He had no time to second-guess his actions. Isaac crouched behind a boulder, using it as cover. His rifle was in his hands, but he wasn't going to wait for them to make the first move. They had seen him, but that was all they were going to see. He raised his weapon, his eyes narrowing as the first figure emerged from the storm. The shot rang out, echoing across the mountain. The man dropped, collapsing into the snow. Isaac didn't hesitate. He immediately turned to the next target. The storm was still howling, and the figures ahead were scattered, trying to find cover. Leah fired next, her aim true, and the second man went down with a loud thud. Isaac's heart raced as he scanned the others. There were too many of them. They weren't going to get away so easily. Rook was moving again, his sleek form disappearing into the swirling snow. Isaac couldn't see the dog anymore, but he trusted him completely. Rook was as much a soldier as Isaac had ever been. The dog's instincts were his own. Isaac turned back to face the remaining threats. He could hear them now, footsteps crunching through the snow, closing in on him. He aimed at the next figure, his finger tightening on the trigger. The shot was clean. The man dropped before he even had a chance to react. But just as Isaac felt a brief sense of relief, the final figure, larger than the rest, emerged from the storm. Isaac didn't have time to reload. He grabbed the pistol at his side and aimed at the man who was charging toward him with a heavy weapon in hand. A blur of movement to Isaac's left caught his attention. Rook was back. The dog launched himself toward the figure, barking fiercely, knocking the man off balance. The struggle was fast and brutal, and in that moment Isaac made his decision. He ran forward, his feet sinking into the snow as he closed the distance. Rook had the man pinned, but Isaac knew the fight wasn't over. The dog's teeth were sunk into the enemy's arm, holding him still while Isaac approached. The final moments were a blur, a mix of pain, adrenaline, and survival instinct. Isaac shoved the man aside, bringing the rifle to bear once more. The man's last breath was a sharp, panicked gasp, and then silence. Isaac stood over him, breathing hard, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the fight. The storm still raged around him, but for the first time in what felt like hours, it didn't matter. The immediate danger had passed. But it wasn't over yet. Isaac turned to Leah, her face pale and drawn but still determined. He motioned toward the edge of the ridge, his gaze scanning the horizon. "Mark's not far. We can't stay here. Not with the helicopter still out there." Leah nodded, her eyes locked on Isaac, her trust in him unspoken but clear. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Isaac gave one last look at the fallen figures on the ridge, each body a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they had to go. "Let's move," he said, his voice low but commanding. Rook was already ahead, his body tense and watchful. Isaac followed with Leah close behind. They had one goal now, survival. And they wouldn't stop until they reached it. The storm finally broke. Its howling fury softened to a quiet hum, leaving behind a blanket of fresh snow that covered everything. The world once swallowed by the blizzard now lay still under a cold, pale sky. Isaac stood on the porch, his breath visible in the crisp air. The pain in his left shoulder still throbbed, but the weight of everything was different now. The worst had passed. Rook stood beside him, his coat gleaming in the soft light. The dog nudged Isaac's hand, seeking attention, a quiet reminder that they weren't alone. Isaac scratched Rook behind the ears, his thoughts drifting. The last few days had been chaos, but now for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence wasn't suffocating, it was peaceful. Isaac thought of Leah. She had been through so much, but there was strength in her now. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived at his cabin a few days ago, terrified and broken. Now she was determined. She had faced her fears, and they had both survived the storm together. Turning, Isaac moved back inside. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting a warm glow on Leah, who sat on the edge of the couch. She looked up as Isaac entered, her face still pale but her eyes steady. "I thought I'd be hearing sirens by now," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had just endured. Isaac chuckled softly, though, his body still ached from the battle. "We're still here. That's what matters." Leah smiled faintly, but there was something else in her gaze, something he hadn't seen before. A quiet strength, a resolve that matched his own. Isaac walked over to the table where the hard drive rested. The evidence of everything they'd uncovered was now their weapon. The fight wasn't over, but for now they had time. Time to breathe, to recover. "I think we're going to be okay," Isaac said, sitting beside Leah. She turned to him, her expression softening. "We made it through," she replied, her voice steady. "We're not the same people we were when we came here." Isaac looked at Rook, who was lying by the fire, eyes half closed. He was at peace now, no longer alert, no longer tense. For the first time, Isaac felt the same way. The storm had passed and the worst was behind them. "Whatever happens next," Isaac said, "we face it together." Leah nodded, her eyes thoughtful. There was no fear left in her, only determination. "Together," she echoed. The cabin was quiet now, save for the crackling of the fire. The world outside had settled into stillness. The storm had taken everything, but it had also given them something, a chance. A chance to fight, to survive, and to keep moving forward. Isaac knew they weren't out of danger yet. There was still work to be done. But as he looked at Leah, then at Rook, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was theirs. And that, in the end, made all the difference.